My name's Tina Ford. I'm 30. 4 years ago, my brother and I built a green tech company from a dusty warehouse in Boulder, Colorado. Every late night, every prototype, every pitch to investors, I poured my soul into it. He handled the charm, I handled the work. We turned that company into a name people trusted, a leader in renewable energy batteries. Then, at our biggest investor gala with cameras flashing and glasses clinking, my father stood up, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're nothing but a figurehead in this company." The room went silent. My stomach dropped. Figurehead me. The one who designed the tech, secured the contracts, built it from nothing. He handed the reins to my brother, the golden child who barely showed up. I stood there frozen as applause filled the room for someone else's name. That moment broke something in me, but it also lit a fire. I wasn't going to let them erase me. I walked out, my heels echoing on the polished floor, already planning my next move. What I did after left them speechless, and it all started with one truth they couldn't bury. If you've ever been betrayed by family, hit that like button, share your story in the comments, and subscribe to join others who fought back against toxic ties. Stay tuned, you won't believe how this unfolds. Growing up in Boulder, our family looked perfect from the outside. My father was an accountant, always in his office crunching numbers, his desk buried under spreadsheets. My mother ran a small flower shop downtown, arranging bouquets with a smile that charmed every customer. To neighbors, we were the ideal middle-class family, 2 kids, a cozy house, weekend barbecues. But inside it was different. My brother Dan, 3 years older, could do no wrong. He'd skip chores, charm his way out of trouble, and still get Dad's proud nod or Mom's extra dessert. I worked hard for every scrap of approval, straight A's, science fairs, anything to stand out. Dan just had to flash a grin. By high school, I found my passion in renewable energy. I'd stay up late reading about solar panels, dreaming of a world powered by clean tech. College was a grind, environmental engineering, endless labs, late-night study sessions. Dan went to business school, partied more than studied, but somehow landed a cushy internship through Dad's connections. I didn't care much then. I was focused. After graduation, I had this crazy idea to start a green tech company. Pinpoint batteries, small, efficient, perfect for renewable energy systems. I needed a partner. Someone to handle the business side. Dan was the obvious choice, not because he was brilliant, but because he was family. I pitched it to him over coffee, laying out my vision. He shrugged, said sounds cool, and signed on. We started Sunvolt in a rented warehouse just outside Boulder. I was 26, burning through savings, sketching battery designs on napkins. I built prototypes, tested circuits, called suppliers at midnight. Dan, he showed up late, made flashy presentations, and networked at local events. I didn't mind at first. I was in the lab making things work. We landed our first client, a small solar company, after I spent weeks perfecting a pitch. Dan took the stage, sold the deal, and they loved him. I thought we were a team. Sunvolt was my baby, but I let Dan share the spotlight. He was good at that part, talking, smiling, shaking hands. I handled the real work, designing the tech, managing production, keeping us afloat. Dad started dropping by, offering advice. He'd pat Dan's shoulder, say he saw big potential in him. Mom would call, gushing about Dan's latest networking event. I'd nod, keep working, tell myself it didn't matter. But it did. Dan's charm masked his laziness. He'd promise clients impossible timelines, leaving me to clean up the mess. Once he forgot to order critical components, and I had to beg a supplier to rush them overnight, costing us thousands. I'd stay up wiring circuits while Dan was out at some industry mixer posting photos online. Still, Sunvolt grew. My designs were solid and clients noticed. We were on the verge of something big, and I thought we'd built it together. Dad and Mom started talking about the family business, but their eyes were always on Dan. I was just the one in the background making it all happen. I didn't see it then, but the cracks were already forming. Dan's ego, Dad's bias, Mom's blind support. It was a storm waiting to hit. Sunvolt grew faster than I ever dreamed. Within 2 years, our little warehouse startup was supplying pinpoint batteries to major players in renewable energy. My design's compact, efficient, reliable landed U.S. contracts with 3 big solar firms across Colorado and California. I'd spend days tweaking prototypes, meeting engineers, ensuring every unit met specs. Dan, meanwhile, was out shaking hands, whining and dining clients, basking in the glow of our success. I didn't mind. The tech was my world, and those contracts were proof we were onto something big. Our revenue hit 7 figures, and industry blogs started calling Sunvolt a rising star. I felt unstoppable, like every late night had been worth it. Then Dad stepped in. He'd been hovering since our first client, offering suggestions I mostly ignored. One evening, he called me to his office, sat me down, and said Dan needed a bigger role. "He's got the vision," Dad claimed, leaning back in his chair. "Make him marketing director." I blinked, stunned. Dan. The guy who barely understood our tech. I explained he had no experience, that marketing needed someone sharp, not just charming. Dad waved me off, saying he's family. Trust him. I pushed back, listing the risks, missed deadlines, mixed messages, but Dad's tone hardened. "You're too focused on details, Tina. Let Dan shine." I left fuming, but caved under pressure. I couldn't say no to family, not yet. Dan took the role and ran with it straight into trouble. He started promising clients delivery dates we couldn't meet, boasting about battery capacities I hadn't even tested. One solar company needed 1,000 units in 6 weeks. Dan swore we could do it in 4. I scrambled, pulling all-nighters to ramp up production, but our suppliers couldn't keep up. The order shipped late, and the client canceled a follow-up deal worth $50,000. I was livid. I called Dan out in our weekly meeting, laying out the numbers: lost revenue, overtime costs, damaged trust. He just shrugged, said, "We'll get the next one." Dad, who'd joined the meeting, nodded along like Dan's nonchalance was genius. I bit my tongue, fixed the schedules, and personally apologized to the client, promising better oversight. It didn't stop there. Dan kept over-promising, charming his way through industry mixers while I cleaned up his messes. Another client complained about mismatched specs. Dan had pitched untested features to close a deal. I spent weeks redesigning components to match his claims, burning through our budget. Every time I raised concerns, Mom would call, her voice soft but firm. "Tina, you need to learn to share the load." Dan's doing his best. Share the load. I was carrying it all. I'd stay late recalibrating equipment while Dan posted about leading the team online. Dad started joining more meetings, praising Dan's big picture thinking. I'd nod, keep working, but the frustration was building. I thought I could fix it, keep Sunvolt on track. But Dan's mistakes were piling up, and Dad's blind support was making it worse. I didn't realize how deep their bias ran, or how much it would cost me. The first real crack came at a late-night board meeting. I was reviewing our quarterly budget, cross-checking expenses, when I noticed a discrepancy: $20,000 missing from our operations fund. Digging deeper, I found invoices for a luxury SUV and a lavish party at a Denver rooftop bar. The name tied to the payments: Dan. My brother had used company money for personal splurges. My hands shook as I pulled up bank records confirming every unauthorized transaction. I felt sick, betrayed by the one person I thought was my partner. I met with Dan and Dad, determined to find answers. When I laid out the evidence: screenshots, receipts, bank statements, Dan leaned back, smirking. "It's just marketing, Tina. Gotta impress clients." Impress clients with a car and a party we couldn't afford. I pressed him, asking how he justified draining our budget. He shrugged, saying it was no big deal. Dad cut in, his voice sharp. "You're being too controlling, Tina. Dan's building relationships." Controlling? I was protecting our company. I pointed out the numbers, how his spending risked our cash flow, our ability to pay suppliers. Dad dismissed me, saying, "You focus on the tech. Let Dan handle the big picture." I turned to Mom, hoping for backup, but she called later that night. Don't stir things up, Tina, she said softly. We need to keep the peace. Peace. At the cost of our company. I buried myself in work, desperate to keep Sunvolt afloat. I spent weeks negotiating with a major energy firm in California, fine-tuning our battery specs to meet their demands. After countless calls and revisions, I signed a contract worth $200,000, a game-changer for us. I was exhausted but proud, thinking this could steady us. Then I opened the local business journal. There was Dan grinning in a photo quoted as the mastermind behind the deal. He'd spoken to the press claiming credit for my work. I called him furious, asking why he lied. It's just PR, he said, laughing. You're too sensitive. Dad texted me later. Good job supporting your brother. Supporting I'd done everything. The betrayal stung deeper than I expected. I started noticing things: how Dad always took Dan's side, how Mom's calls focused on Dan's stress rather than my efforts. At board meetings, my ideas were brushed off while Dan's half-baked pitches got nods of approval. I'd walk into the office, see Dan chatting with staff, acting like the boss while I was buried in production schedules. I tried talking to Mom again, hoping she'd see reason. You're doing great, Tina, she said, but Dan needs to shine too. Shine. He was undermining everything I built. I started feeling like an outsider in my own company, questioning who I could trust. The family I thought would stand by me was slipping away, and I was too deep in the grind to see how much worse it would get. The annual Investor Gala changed everything. It was Boulder's biggest clean tech event, packed with investors, reporters, and industry leaders. I'd spent weeks preparing, polishing our pitch, showcasing our latest battery designs ready to prove Sunvolt's worth. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, smiling, shaking hands, feeling like we'd made it. Then Dad took the stage. He thanked the crowd, praised our family business, and announced my brother Dan as the new CEO. The room clapped, but I froze. CEO Dan, who'd done nothing but charm and spend. Before I could process it, Dad looked straight at me, his voice booming through the mic. Tina's been great, but she's nothing but a figurehead. Dan's the real visionary. The words hit like a punch. Figurehead. I'd built Sunvolt's tech, secured its contracts, kept it alive. The crowd murmured, cameras flashed, and I felt every eye on me, stripping away years of work. I couldn't breathe. My face burned as I slipped out of the ballroom, heels clicking, humiliation trailing me like a shadow. In the parking lot, I sat in my car, gripping the wheel, replaying Dad's words. Nothing but a figurehead. Dan, the CEO. He didn't even understand our batteries. I swore then and there I wouldn't let them erase me. I'd show them who built this company. That night, I called Heidi Spencer, my best friend and a former Sunvolt engineer who'd left after clashing with Dan. I told her everything: Dad's announcement, the public slight, my anger. Heidi didn't hesitate. We'll take him down, she said, her voice steady. She'd seen Dan's shady moves up close and knew where to look. Heidi dug into old company records, pulling late-night shifts with me over coffee and laptops. We sifted through financials, emails, anything that could expose Dan. Within days, she found a goldmine: internal emails from Dan to a junior accountant instructing them to fudge revenue numbers for our quarterly reports. He'd inflated our profits by $50,000 to impress investors, hiding losses from his reckless spending. I stared at the screen, heart racing. This wasn't just carelessness, it was deception, deliberate and calculated. Heidi printed the emails, her hands shaking with excitement. This is it, Tina, she said. He's done. I felt a spark of hope mixed with rage. Dan had taken credit, taken money, and now taken my role. But I had proof, and I wasn't going to stay quiet. We kept digging, building a case. Heidi tracked down a supplier who'd complained about Dan's side deals, promising contracts for personal favors. I cross-checked dates, tying his actions to budget shortfalls I'd been forced to fix. Every email, every transaction fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for Sunvolt anymore. I was fighting for myself. Dad's words echoed in my head, but they didn't break me. They pushed me to act. I knew the truth would come out, but I had to play this smart. Dan thought he'd won, that I'd fade into the background. He had no idea what was coming. For weeks, I locked myself in my apartment planning my next move. Dad's words at the gala calling me a figurehead burned, but they fueled me too. I wasn't done. I'd built Sunvolt from nothing, and I could do it again better. I started sketching out a new company, EcoPulse, focused on next-generation sustainable batteries. I worked late into the night drafting business plans, designing prototypes, reaching out to old contacts from my engineering days. I kept it quiet, registering the company under a holding name to avoid suspicion. EcoPulse was my lifeline, a chance to reclaim what was mine. I wasn't just fighting for revenge, I was building something they couldn't touch. Heidi was with me every step, relentless in our hunt for more evidence. We'd already found Dan's faked revenue reports, but we needed to prove a pattern. She combed through archived financial records, uncovering transactions that didn't add up, hundreds of thousands diverted to questionable consulting fees. One email chain showed Dad approving these transfers, knowing they propped up Dan's inflated numbers. My heart sank. My own father was in on it, cooking the books to make Dan look like a genius. Heidi and I cross-referenced dates, linking their moves to board meetings where I'd been sidelined. Every discovery tightened the knot in my chest, but it also sharpened my focus. We had a dossier now, emails, receipts, bank records, enough to bury them. I knew we needed allies with real power. That's when I reached out to Jane Morrison, a major investor who'd backed Sunvolt early on. I'd met her at industry events, always admired her sharp instincts. Over coffee, I didn't spill everything, just hinted at internal issues at Sunvolt enough to raise her eyebrows. "That's troubling," Jane said, setting down her cup. "If there's deception, I want to know." I slid her a redacted summary of our findings, careful not to tip my hand. She didn't need much convincing. 2 days later, she emailed the Sunvolt board demanding an independent audit of our finances. I could almost hear Dan's smug grin fading. The audit hit Sunvolt like a storm. Jane's influence brought in forensic accountants who started digging into every transaction. I stayed in the shadows, still technically part of the company, watching as Dad and Dan scrambled to explain themselves. Board meetings turned tense, with investors asking pointed questions about discrepancies. Dan tried to charm his way out, blaming clerical errors, but the accountants weren't buying it. Heidi kept feeding me updates, her texts buzzing late at night with new findings, more fake invoices, more hidden losses. EcoPulse was gaining traction too. I'd secured a small seed fund from a contact who trusted my work, not Dan's name. I was building my future while Sunvolt started to crack. Dan and Dad had no idea how deep I'd gone, or how close they were to losing everything. The National Clean Tech Expo in Denver was my chance. I'd spent months building EcoPulse, perfecting its battery design, securing a small booth to showcase my work. The expo was buzzing, investors, engineers, and reporters everywhere. I stood on stage presenting EcoPulse's vision: sustainable, scalable energy solutions. The crowd leaned in, impressed by our prototypes. Then I took a deep breath and played the video Heidi and I had prepared. It was damning clips of Dan's emails instructing accountants to inflate profits, receipts for his luxury purchases, and internal memos showing Dad's approval of fake contracts to mislead investors. I kept my voice steady, explaining how these actions had undermined Sunvolt's integrity. The room went silent, then erupted in murmurs. Jane, sitting in the front row, nodded grimly. She'd seen enough already. By the next morning, the fallout was unstoppable. Jane and 2 other major investors pulled their funding from Sunvolt, citing loss of trust. Business journals ran headlines: "Sunvolt Scandal Rocks Clean Tech Industry." Reporters swarmed, digging into Dan's mismanagement and Dad's complicity. A class action lawsuit followed, filed by smaller investors who'd been misled by falsified reports. Sunvolt's stock plummeted and suppliers cut ties, refusing to work with a sinking ship. Dan tried to spin it, giving interviews about misunderstandings, but no one bought it. The evidence was ironclad. Within weeks, Sunvolt filed for bankruptcy, its name tarnished beyond repair. Dan's reputation collapsed. He went from CEO to a nobody, taking a job as a car salesman in Denver, barely scraping by. Dad and Mom standing in Boulder's tight-knit community evaporated. Their perfect family image was gone. Mom called me, her voice trembling, begging me to stop the lawsuits to keep this in the family. I listened, my heart heavy, but I'd had enough. "You chose Dan over me?" I said, my voice firm. "This is the consequence." I hung up, and that was the last time we spoke. I blocked their numbers, cutting them out for good. It hurt, but I'd learned family wasn't worth sacrificing my self-respect. EcoPulse, meanwhile, was soaring. One of SunVolt's former clients, a major California energy firm, reached out. They'd seen my expo presentation and wanted EcoPulse's batteries. I signed a contract worth $300,000, my first big win. It felt like justice, not just for me, but for every hour I'd poured into SunVolt only to be called a figurehead. I didn't stop there. I poured my energy into EcoPulse, hiring a small team of engineers who shared my vision. We developed new battery tech, cutting costs for solar farms across the West. I also launched a mentorship program training young women in clean tech, girls like me who'd been overlooked but had big dreams. Every workshop I led, every prototype we built, reminded me why I'd fought so hard. EcoPulse wasn't just a company, it was proof I was more than what my family thought. Dad, and Mom, they'd underestimated me, and they paid the price. I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd built something better on my terms. Looking back, I learned one thing: self-respect matters more than validation from a toxic family. They called me a figurehead, tried to erase my work, but I turned their betrayal into my strength. I walked away from their lies and built a legacy that's mine alone. To everyone who's followed this story, thank you for sticking with me. If you've ever had to stand up to family or fight for what's yours, share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear them. Hit that like button, subscribe, and join the thousands who've found strength in cutting toxic ties. This isn't just my story. It's a reminder that you can rise above no matter who tries to hold you back.